All right, you just saw Sergei Rudskoy there from the Defense Department, their spokesperson, summing up the latest events in Syria. Just to recap briefly some of the salient headlines that came out, he said the Syrian army's retaken control of 93% of Aleppo. He said more than 1,000 militants have surrendered arms and left eastern Aleppo. 953 of them have been pardoned. A few more headlines that came out. More than 3,000 Aleppo residents apparently have returned to their homes in areas liberated from terrorists in the past 3 days alone. And another interesting fact that came out, he said then that Aleppo residents have reported torture, executions and other crimes being carried out allegedly by what's so often been described till now as the moderate opposition militants. All instances, he said, are being documented, and of course they will be examined in great detail in the coming days. So that's the latest update there from Sergei Rudskoy. Now, there are other developments to tell you about too. Russia and America's top diplomats have struck a breakthrough agreement to try to extract the remaining moderate, whatever you want to call them, terrorist rebel forces. They're being described very differently by different people in the Syrian city of Aleppo. It's expected the actual details of how it's going to be implemented will be thrashed out at the weekend in Geneva, particularly on Saturday. However, Russia's foreign minister has also expressed concern going into that meeting over whether the Americans will actually stick to the agreement. With more on it, more detail, is our Europe correspondent, Peter Oliver.
Well, he was talking about the deal that's been put in place. Essentially, let's face it, this is a deal that could see the whole of the city of Aleppo potentially come under the control of Syrian government forces, that would see the rebels in that city being able to, as long as they leave their heavy weaponry, leave and be sent somewhere else and get out of that city and out of the current surrounding, the situation in which they find themselves, in which they are surrounded. I asked him about the reaction from his Western partners when it comes to the liberation of large parts of the city. He said it was understandable considering which side they backed in the fight.
Regarding the reaction of Western colleagues to what's going on in eastern Aleppo, I see and hear what they say. There are sometimes quite hysterical, emotional statements about the need to stop these war crimes and bring everyone to justice. They ask for a resolution in the Security Council. They ask to deliver humanitarian aid and to stop fighting for 10 days. But I think everyone understands now that in eastern Aleppo, the militants are in agony. We don't want to support those who would prefer, without any negotiations, to finish off the militants by any means. We are ready to solve the issue without any additional victims and destruction. And that's why we have for such a long time been negotiating with the Americans, who pledged to talk to the militants and ask them to leave eastern Aleppo on good terms.
Well, Sergei Lavrov went on to talk about his dealings with US Secretary of State John Kerry and with the United States in general over Syria. He said that they were pretty difficult to place on the issue, in fact going as far as to say that their attitude towards Aleppo was strange. They didn't want to call the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front terrorists right up until the last minute of negotiations on this particular deal, because essentially this is a diplomatic nightmare for the United States. They backed one side wholeheartedly, and that side, it seems they are now trying to negotiate a deal in which they can retreat from the city of Aleppo. And it's also, according to Sergei Lavrov, a deal that they're not particularly willing to accept. Now, the talks on the deal will continue on Saturday in Geneva, when it's hoped that all of the finesse will be ironed out. However, the Russian foreign minister didn't rule out the United States pulling out of the deal again.
If the American side won't change its mind, as it did a couple of days ago, and they don't put forward something completely new, we have a good chance of sealing a deal on how to settle the situation in eastern Aleppo by making all militants leave the area.
So all eyes turn to Geneva on Saturday, where it's hoped that the best chance for bringing a peaceful resolution to the ongoing crisis in Aleppo can be found.